Welcome everyone who's on. We're giving people a few minutes to sign on. I think in the next minute, I'll go ahead and start introducing Jane, and then we'll let folks trickle in there after that. So thanks for joining us this morning. All right, I will get started with introductions here. So thank you to Jane for joining us this morning. Dr. Taylor received her medical degree from the University of North Carolina School of Medicine. Following a residency in pediatrics at Vanderbilt University, she served as the Pediatric Pulmonary Fellow at St. Louis Children's Hospital. In 2009, Dr. Taylor joined the Pediatric Pulmonary Division at Children's Mercy Hospital, where she served as the Pulmonary Medical Director of the Multidisciplinary Muscular Dystrophy Clinic and an Associate Professor of Pediatrics at the University of Missouri. She received a master's in clinical research from the University of Kansas. She was recruited, thankfully, to the Division of Pulmonary and Sleep Medicine at UPMC Children's Hospital Pittsburgh in 2019, just prior to the pandemic. So a lot of people didn't get to know Jane as well. And I know myself personally was like, who is this Dynamo? Where'd she come from? And then I realized that she had just been hired while we were all on the computers. Her clinical research involves working with large de-identified databases for children with extreme prematurity and children with interstitial lung disease. She is the Pulmonary Neuromuscular Clinical Director for the MDA Clinic at UPMC Children's and is on the Medical Advisory Board for Cure SMA. Dr. Taylor participates in several large national organizations and is a current board member for the local American Lung Association Board of Western Pennsylvania and West Virginia. She sits on the Leadership Council for the Midwest Society of Pediatric Research. Dr. Taylor has also served on the American Thoracic Society's Pediatric Executive Committee as the Web Director and was awarded the Pediatric Assembly ATS Clinical Educator of the Year Award in 2021. And I think we'll be hearing a little bit about her work with them. She currently serves as the ATS Journal Club Committee and as on the ATS Journal Club Committee and as an editor for pediatric cases for the ATS Quick Hit submissions and the editor moderator for the monthly Pediatric Pulmonary ATS Case Conference Series and Town Hall Series. Dr. Taylor is currently pursuing a certificate in medical education from the University of Pittsburgh. When not working, she enjoys hiking and biking with her husband, 2 sons, and dog Ellie. She loves astronomy, juggling, poetry, and tries to cook with varying degrees of success. That sounds similar to me. So Jane, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Welcome to everybody who has joined on, and we will get started with Jane's talk, Coordinating Multi-Center Medical Education Collaborative Efforts, Tips for Maximizing Expertise in Group Teaching Endeavors. Thank you, Dr. Taylor.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Jane Taylor, and I'm one of the pediatric pulmonologists from Children's Hospital in Pittsburgh. And I would like to thank Dr. Zuckerbraun for inviting me to speak today. And I'm going to be talking about how to coordinate the multi-center medical education collaborative projects. So let's go ahead and get started. So first off, that is a huge title. So woof. I like to break it down to something much simpler. So we're going to talk about how to play nicely in the multi-center medical educational sandbox. And to start off, I don't have any disclosures or conflicts of interest pertaining to this topic. So we're going to start off with an introduction. We're then going to discuss different educational platforms that we can use and steps for creating content. So first off, as my teenagers always say, why should we listen to you, Mom? So who am I? To start off, I actually went to college at Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota. And I mention this because actually a lot of my collaborators also went to this college. So it's all about networking. And after that, I went to UNC Chapel Hill School of Medicine, then slowly worked my way back towards the Midwest at Vanderbilt University Pediatric residency program, again, meeting people along the way, and ended up at Washington University in St. Louis for their Pediatric Pulmonology Fellowship program. And this was back home for me. I'm from St. Louis and also have family in Kansas City. So after fellowship, it made sense that I went on to get a master's in clinical research through K-30 training program at the University of Kansas in Kansas City. So far, I have been mostly at Children's Mercy in Kansas City for over 10 years. And that is a private freestanding children's hospital that's associated with both the University of Missouri, Kansas City, which is through the University of Missouri system, and also the University of Kansas. So I had access to 2 large academic centers there. I then had married a Pittsburgh boy, and we knew that eventually we were going to move back to help his parents because he's an only child. So 2.5 years ago, right before COVID, I came here to Pittsburgh and have been happily working with my partners here. And why is this important? Well, the biggest thing to take away from this is networking. Each place I went, I met more people, not just in pediatrics, but in other disciplines. And I have maintained my friendships with them and started collaborative projects. So back in fellowship, there had been one of the attendings that had a child at Carleton College. We had become buddies, and he actually started the first regional webinar that I also had helped run. And that eventually turned into the ATS Pediatric Pulmonary and Sleep Case Conference monthly webinar. So you never know when a small project is going to turn into something big. And what have I been up to? Well, with my master's in clinical research, I became the site PI in Kansas City for the American Lung Association Airways Clinical Research Centers. And from there, I was asked to join the local and regional board for Kansas and Missouri. And from that, I started helping to create content for the Regional Lung Force Expo yearly educational conferences, which were in person. I also would teach for the Asthma Educators Institute, which is set up to teach respiratory therapists who are going to take their Asthma Educators National Exam. And I would help fundraise with the yearly Fight for Air Climb, which also had a lot of coordination and kind of organizing that went into it. At the same time, I had met a very good mentor in Vanderbilt who was both pediatric pulmonology and neonatology. And that led into an interest for the Center for Infant and Pulmonary Disorders at Children's Mercy. And since I had a master's in clinical research, I came on as their pediatric pulmonologist as a collaborative PI for a large de-identified database. And it was part of the Neonatal Research Network projects. What's also interesting is my mentor, who I still work very closely with, Bill Trogue, was from Carleton College as well, just several years before me. And because in any type of NICU, you see a lot of childhood interstitial lung disease, I became friends with the ILD pediatric pulmonologists nationally. And they also had a large de-identified database. So I became a site PI at Children's Mercy for their group. And we started running prospective multi-center drug trials, as well as de-identified database work. And here I actually am still a part of this network, but my good friend, Dr. Jeff Curlin, is our fearless leader there. And at the same time, when I had moved to Kansas City, I actually had a child with a neuromuscular condition, and there was not any type of organized multidisciplinary clinic there. So I worked closely with one of my friends in neurology and another in physical medicine and rehab, and we put together the first kind of MDA pediatric clinic at Children's Mercy. And from that, we started working with the Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy, which is the pediatric Duchenne's group. We became a center of excellence, and I became the center director there. And we're currently undergoing accreditation here at CHP for this group, and began helping to set up their national educational meetings for providers, but also the other national meetings for families as well. And it would be 2 separate meetings, but run simultaneously at the same time in the same location. Here we're part of the Muscular Dystrophy Association. So for the last 2.5 years, I have had the pleasure of working with Dr. Hoda Abdelhamid and Dr. Jason Ettinger, and it has been wonderful. And we also run a lot of different regional work with the MDA group, as well as started a family advocacy board here at Children's and doing a lot of work with webinars and web-based platforms. As well as Cure SMA, we were a center at Children's Mercy, and they have a large de-identified database that we were involved with there. And we also are involved here, and I'm the site PI for their de-identified database. And I'm a member of their National Medical Advisory Council as well. And they also have national meetings that I have helped with, and of course now virtually. So who currently is in my sandbox? And the biggest group that I work with right now is the American Thoracic Society. And I have been on their web committee for about 15 years. That's how old I am. And I'm currently the Pediatric Assembly web director. Because of that, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of wonderful people around the country. And we work on a monthly pediatric pulmonary case conference series, as well as a monthly pediatric pulmonary sleep case conference series. We have Quick Hits, which is a radiology-based vignette online, and we were able to start a pediatric section for that and get editors set up for those cases. And we have kind of branched out into town halls as well as journal clubs and some other endeavors. So we've been pretty busy, but very exciting stuff at ATS. I also work closely with the American Lung Association. And again, I'm on the regional board. So because of that, I've done a lot with the Asthma Educators Institute yearly and the Lung Force Expo. But we've also been able to coordinate here in Pennsylvania, Day at the Capitol, where we organize some of the kind of high school and college students to go and talk with some of the people at the state capitol about e-cigarette and vaping impact on their age group. And I've continued to be an instructor with the Asthma Educator Institute here. And finally, my work from neonatology got me into the Midwest Society for Pediatric Research, which feeds into the PAS group. And I'm currently on their executive council. And the big push that I have is to help set up their yearly virtual conference, which we just completed 2 weeks ago. So from ATS, one of the important things that I've learned over time is to stay organized. And as you can see here, this is one of the slide updates that I gave at our last year's meeting. And you can see that I'm here and I was able to recruit some of my friends. So my friend, Dr. Tang Santiago, is now a co-chair to kind of help with all of this. And you can see that when I had started this back in fellowship with my friend Dennis Stokes, who had the daughter at Carleton at the time, we were just doing the ATS Pediatric Pulmonary Sleep Conference Series and Pediatric Pulmonary Conference Series. And that has continued to grow. And because of that, we've been able to share our expertise with my friends at the Virtual International Pediatric Pulmonary Group. And they've started their own web series up over here, as well as some of the early career bench scientists who have started their web series. At the same time, we had decided that journal clubs would be a good idea. And we had some friends that were in the adult critical care group that had just started it. So we learned from them and started our journal club series for about the last 6 years, which has very quickly during COVID-19 turned into another series called the Town Halls, where instead of having an actual paper that's highlighted, we have an issue and we pull in panelists on that issue and are able to have a discussion on that. So that's been something that just started in the last 2 years. We have other educational endeavors that we are starting on, podcasts, Quick Hits that I had mentioned before, which are the radiographic vignettes, as well as the Pediatric Flexible Bronchoscopy Atlas, because we, at this point, can't have our fellows go and learn bronchoscopy techniques from the expert. We used to have an on-site educational bronch course at Cincinnati, which Dr. Kurland helped run. But with COVID, we couldn't do that. So we figured out a way to actually do a lot of virtual online educational teaching and have been able to do that virtually for the last year. And this is an archived atlas that also will be a resource for fellows when they can't actually go in person to this course. And with that said, you can of course create something, but at the same time, is it something that's going to be used? So you want to make sure that you think about ways to track the actual educational content. That's something here that you can see in the past year, we were able to track how many times we actually had views for the journal club. And the journal club usually has about 100 participants. But after that, we had 1,520 views for people that couldn't be there at the time of the actual live virtual presentation. The same with Quick Hits views, we track that over time. the ATS case conference series we track. And as you can see, it's something that over time we're able to see, are we getting more people engaged, less, what's going on? Do we need to change platforms? And it kind of lets us have just a running monitoring system for all of our educational content. So let's say we want to start something. Does anyone have any initial thoughts? If you want to, type them into group chat and we will discuss. And Noelle, unfortunately, I cannot pull up the chat on my side of the things while I'm sharing my screen. Has anything popped up yet?
I'll monitor it. And no, we haven't had any. So any initial thoughts about how to get started? Is that what you're getting at, Jane?
Correct. Anyone want to throw out some ideas about what you might think about if you're going to start, let's say, a case conference series? We'll start there. And it's okay if people are like, I have no idea. Please go through it. That's why we're doing this. Okay, so let's get started. So first thing is you want to increase the diversity of content. And to do this, you need to recruit from multiple centers. And the reason that I say this is each center tends to have different expertise. So at least for our case conference series, we have Cincinnati involved, and they're the international experts in airway reconstructive surgery. So there's always good cases about that. We have St. Jude, so there's always something about cancer. We have our center, so lung transplant. And by pulling from different centers, you get lots of different content. And you also have to realize that regionally, there are going to be different types of problems. Like in the Mississippi River Valley, there's histoplasmosis. So you can get lots of good cases that way. There's some really strange infectious disease, things that pop up, especially in New Orleans, if you eat raw crawfish that I had never heard of before. And we had 2 cases on that at this conference series. And then sure enough, I had a patient that had come up with pulmonary eosinophilia, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. And I got a good history of allergies, and I asked about food allergies or any new strange foods. And sure enough, they had gone on a Boy Scout trip down in Mississippi of all places, and had found some crayfish and decided to cook them up, obviously not well enough. So I think that's the first time that I actually made a diagnosis before my ID friend. It was very exciting. What we also want to do is increase participation and then retention of our faculty that's helping to create some of this content. And one of my mentors in fellowship told me, Jane Taylor, I work for cheap, but not for free. You need to make sure whatever you do, you get some kind of reimbursement or credit for it. And I've always remembered that. So what I like to do is include all of my workers in kind of the yearly updates that we send out to group members, because they can keep that for their CV building and mention them in kind of the yearly review at the national meeting. So you saw when I had pulled up all of the content, I had listed who the sub co-chairs were for each individual endeavor for ATS. And that way they can keep a copy of the slide in their CV and use it for their promotion packet. And that actually is key. So you also want to increase just the overall achievement of the medical education content. And to do this, you need to create an organizational oversight plan to keep everyone on the same page. With that, set realistic timeline goals, because what you don't want to do is throw out a lot of great ideas, but put too much on your plate for the first year and then have people get burned out. So I usually will set 1 year, 2 year, and 5 year goals and tell everyone we're going to start slow. That's fine. It will pick up momentum. And that's what we did with the Mississippi River Valley Pulmonary Conference, which has turned into the ATS Case Conference Series. It only started out with 6 different centers, and from there has increased exponentially, but it's taken 15 years to do so. We also schedule frequent group meetings, about 3 to 6 months. We'll have get-togethers to make sure that we're all on the same page. And if for some reason, people are busy, they can't make it, I actually will quickly take some meeting minutes and post it so they can quickly read, check up, and move forward. And it keeps us organized.
Jane, there's a question in the chat.
Sure.
Getting at how to recruit folks for multi-center collaboration, and then is there funding that's needed for that, and maybe what your experience has been?
So that's a great question. So let me go back here. So the question of how to recruit, it actually is through a lot of these different groups. I've met people and it's just word of mouth. So knowing who the other pediatric pulmonologists were and the fellowship directors, we would reach out to them. And once the actual content starts and you're consistent with it, people then see that it's something that they can count on and start to sign up for it. And slowly over time it grows. Now, the good question about funding to start this, I have not had any funding for any of this, but that's another reason why you need to be very careful with people that are contributing, because they're going to be doing it on their own time. So it's going to have to somehow benefit them. And that's how making sure they get credit so they can put it on their CV and get traction there in their own careers. And that is how we have kind of made sure that we have the staff and workforce to help move forward. Now for the American Thoracic Society, they do have some coordinators. So if you work with national groups, there usually is 1 or 2 staff that can help you with some minor things. But I've been running most of it just through the Webex that Children's Mercy had. And then UPMC also has that staff and faculty can use. You just have to know to ask for it. And that takes us then to software considerations. So what virtual platform do you want to use? And to be quite honest, I use whichever one is free with the center that I'm working at. And if you're working at a large academic center, they usually have kind of picked one and will then work with that group. So we have Webex here at UPMC that I've been using. We also now have Teams. Both are excellent. GoToMeeting and Zoom are also used. And you just need to know that some are a little better than others at doing breakout sessions. Some give the actual moderator more control, so you can quickly mute individuals and you can, turn people's videos on and off. Other platforms have better audio quality because you actually have them calling into a main center where you can then edit out background noise. So just kind of knowing the ins and outs of the different platforms is pretty helpful when you're choosing. But again, I say go with the one that your center has that is free for you to use. Now recording, there is the Windows media format, MP4. The reason that you want to know what the platform is going to record in is for archiving purposes, which we'll talk about in a second. And some of the different national groups, or sometimes we've archived just on the academic center's webpage, but they will have preference for what you're recording in. And some of the platforms like Windows media format is a lot easier for me to edit out background noise than the MP4 format. So having those kind of ideas in mind. And if you have absolutely no idea how to do that, it's actually not the end of the world, because there are IT people that were at Children's Mercy. There's even IT people here that you can meet with and can actually walk you through it. So it's not something that you have to know immediately. It's something that you do have resources here that if you reach out to people, they can teach you. Now, with that editing strategy in mind, you also want to know about the data transfer issue, because a lot of these are going to have video and audio files, which are fairly large, and it's going to be hard to send them via email. In fact, impossible pretty much. So you have to have an idea for how to transfer the files to the actual national organizations that are going to archive them. And what this means is, does this have any protected information? Is there any medical legal aspects to this, HIPAA concerns? And if so, Dropbox is not the best choice because it's not really password protected or firewall protected. Whereas things like Highwire and other Dropbox-like services, which do cost some money, but usually not that much. And a lot of the national groups, have chosen one and have contracted with them, are behind a firewall. So it's much more protected data.
Hey, Jane, could you talk a little bit, I'm not, maybe other folks are, but I'm not familiar with Webex and the utilities of that. And then I'm sure people can contact you offline, but who have been your IT go-tos here if folks are thinking of wanting to get some, more education one-on-one for editing and such as you described?
Yeah, absolutely. So Webex is what is used here at UPMC, and it's very similar to Teams and GoToMeeting and Zoom, but it has a little more control on the back end for editing, which is why I like it. So it does cost some money, but again, if your institution has bought a yearly contract with them, you can get access to it. And once you've done a recording, if say one of your presenters has issues with construction on the street, that actually produces a pretty standard kind of noise form, and you can edit that out. As well as, let's say something happens and two people get into a heated debate in the middle of the case conference series about what to do over management that might not be something that you want archived. It's pretty easy to cut that out. So that's why I like Webex. So from the editing side of things, it gives you a little more control. And here I will have to find his name and I'll send it to you so you can send it out to everyone. But he works downstairs in the AOB on that first floor. He also is the guy that takes everyone's pictures. So all of us have met him. And he goes around to the different hospitals and he does a lot of the promotions for UPMC and CHP and is the audio tech guy and is very nice. We had great conversations about podcasts actually. And that's where I figured out that yes, he actually will come and do tutorials. And if you need any equipment, can set it up if he knows ahead of time. So he's pretty busy. You want to make sure that you plan ahead at least 1 to 2 months.
Thank
To
you.
be quite honest though, with Webex, I haven't needed him. So that's where you can kind of teach yourself and move on with that Webex platform. That's why I prefer that one. I'm much more self-sufficient that way. Okay, so the next thing is archiving plans, because obviously having the conference is important, but not everyone can be there in real time. And you want to make sure that others have access to this and can use it over time. So you want to make sure that you actually have thought about how you're going to record, transfer, and then get it uploaded onto the website of whatever national committee or academic site you're going to use to be the home of the medical education content. You want to consider if firewalls are needed. A lot of times, we make sure there's no actual direct HIPAA in the case conference series that's disclosed, but some of these are extremely rare conditions, like maybe 5 in the country. And based on the actual center presenting, sometimes people have figured out who they're talking about in some of these Facebook groups with different families. Luckily not in anything that I have been a part of, but I've heard of it happening. That's why for ATS, we actually put the case conference series behind one of the firewalls to make sure that you have to be a member of ATS to actually get access to it. There's also some legal implications of posted material. And for our bench scientists and clinical researchers who are in the young faculty web series, can they publish new results if they have done this type of presentation and then it's put up on the web as an e-publication? And most of the time it's not an issue, but there have been 1 or 2 problems with certain journals if it's put up in certain formats. So that's something that the actual moderators and chairs of that webinar are very aware of, and they've reached out to the actual journal editors for some of the big journals to make sure that they know exactly what is considered usable for future publication and what potentially would be discredited if it was presented in that type of format. So let's get started. And you're set up, you're ready to go. There's actually lots of different things you can do. So let's start by talking about a case conference series. How would we potentially go about starting that? And I like to always think about the who, what, when, where, why, and how. And if you can answer those questions, you basically have set up a good conference series. So starting off with who, you want to identify your centers. Again, starting small and slowly building over time. Usually 6 to 12 is ideal because then you have either every other month consistently or monthly. We would always take off as we were building up from 6 to 12, would take the summer off around the time that the fellows would transition. So everyone knew that it would be monthly until we took summer break. And then as more people came on, it's just every month at this point. And once we went to the ATS platform, we now have 3 different regional groups that present on the same day that are pretty much over their lunch hour. And again, getting people from different regions and diverse expertise is important, just to make sure you're not presenting the same thing over and over again. When you're setting it up initially, you do want to take the time to set up a charter and organizational plan, because this is something that you're then going to use year after year to keep everyone on the same page. It also helps keep people that are joining something to look at and understand how it flows. First off, you designate a conference scheduler or coordinator. That can be an admin that's working with the main moderator. It can be the moderator themselves. I actually do it myself. It's not hard. And we just make sure that we're very consistent and everyone knows the time of year that, you know, the call for sign up goes out and it closes 2 months after that and the schedule is set. We don't change after that. Also creating a listserv and designate a manager to keep up with the distribution list for the monthly sendouts for conference, and picking your platform and the file transfer plan up front. So what do you want your conference to look like? And that's where you clearly define the goals of the series. And for our series, we decided that we were going to do 2 cases, and it would be 20 minutes per case. It would have 5 to 10 minutes for the case, and then 5 to 10 minutes for an actual review of the current literature, with then 10 minutes reserved for a group discussion of how the different centers are managing it. We set ground rules up front with consequences. You don't want to have an issue pop up and not have a clear plan on how to handle it. And I know it sounds silly, but it does happen. So you want to make sure that there are camera and audio rules of conduct that are very clear, consequences for missed sessions. So we have the 3 strikes, you're out. So if you miss, that's okay if there's an emergency once or twice, but if we start to see a consistent pattern, you're asked to leave the conference. And then also what is considered polite discourse or more aggressive questioning, and you're given warnings. And if your center again has that 3rd issue, then you're asked to leave the conference. You also want to have an idea for how you're going to advertise the conference and recruitment strategy. So a lot of times we'll go to the fellowship directors and they have national fellowship director groups and distribute information about the content ahead of time so people are aware of it. And then always the question of when should you do the conference? And typically about an hour is what most people can fit into their schedules and also stay awake and alert for. If you start to go longer than that, people lose interest. So we keep it at an hour, and the time of day is important. So either early in the morning before people start their routines or around lunchtime is the best time to try and capture a multi-center collaborative effort. You want to maintain consistency, and that is key. You don't want to skip sessions, and you need to make sure that it's something that people can count on. And this is where also sending out meeting invites about 1 to 2 weeks before. You don't want to send it out weeks in advance or it gets lost in people's emails. So pretty close to the time of the conference, send out the actual links. And then you want to decide where, and in-person venues, because we are going to start setting some of those up again in the near future. Things to remember is seating capacity. How many people actually can sit in the room? What about parking? Is it free? Is it something where they're going to have to walk a long distance? You want to make sure that there's easy navigation from parking to venue, especially for individuals that might have disabilities. You need to think about facilities like bathroom and access to food. Audio visual equipment, is it going to be there? Do you need to bring your own? Is there staff to help troubleshoot during the day of the event? And how are you going to organize the speakers and moderators? Now, this is why I have liked the virtual venue, because a lot of that you don't have to think about, and you just pick your platform. You make sure that there's pre-training for the presenters and the people that are participating, and you make sure that you have a moderator to help guide people through it, but it's actually a lot easier. Now, why do you want to do a case conference series? And for our medical education endeavors, we decided that it was to enhance resident and fellow education. We wanted to practice presentation skills for that group, promote mentorship between residents and fellows and older faculty at these different centers, and also promote some of the multi-center collaboration. So we now have some de-identified databases on histoplasmosis and other conditions that actually came out of some of the case conference series and discussions that we had as multi-center groups from that, and then overall promoting research. And again, how to do this, what I would do is obtain content outline from the in-training exams and also the maintenance of certification exams. And I look through it to make sure that I know kind of what we're wanting to focus on. And I re-review about every 5 years, because some things go out of date, new things come up. So I have a list of what we are looking for, and I make sure that I distribute it to the centers. So if a fellow's like, I wonder if this would be a good case, well, they might not be here at CHP to ask me directly. So at least there's a list that their center coordinator has that can then show them. We also have pulled Fellowship Division Directors National Group about every 2 to 3 years for topics that they would like to see reviewed, and if there have been any flagged deficiency areas and ways that we can help improve their curriculum. That also helps engage the different centers, because they're getting something important out of it as well. We want to work very hard on making sure that a lot of this content is accessible to all of the learners, not just during the actual online portion, but in the future when it's archived. So creating keywords and a way to search is an important thing to discuss with the IT group where you're going to archive it. And then also allowing for group discussion after each case, and having that moderator who acts as a facilitator for future content as well, and contact, because sometimes people will have a question and will email it to me, and I'm then able to get them into contact with the presenter or whoever asked the question in the group chat during the actual live session. And that started some collaborative efforts as well. Now, again, you hear me harping on the archiving strategy, and I cannot express how important this is. So we're going to go through this. And what you want to do is you pick your virtual home for the conference. You want to design the link for the conference on that virtual home page. You design the web page for that conference, which is linked to the home page. And you have to determine if there are any legal issues before starting the conference. So how have I done this with the American Thoracic Society case conference series? And first off, here is an example of our actual PEDS Assembly webpage. And as you can see here, I have a link to the ATS Pediatric Pulmonary and Sleep case series right there. If you click on that, it actually pulls up this area here, which is a separate web page embedded on the PEDS Assembly page. And I worked very closely with the IT group at ATS. I told them exactly what I wanted, and they created it for me. And most of the national groups have about 5 people, and it's their job to do this. You just need to be very clear with what you want and what your vision is. So as you can see, I had given them information on what the title was, what we wanted, a little vignette about, what this conference is about, who the editors are, how to contact us is at the bottom of the page. And then we have the actual post for the latest cases. We have the presenter, what institution they're from, and when the actual presentation was from. We also, at the very bottom, do have a disclaimer, because you do have to take into account that there could be some medical legal issues. So if an individual pulls up this case conference series and it's like 5 years later, and it happens to be, a provider who's like, oh, well, I'm just going to do this, things could have changed. There might be newer strategies that they should employ, and each patient is different. So you want to make sure that there's some type of language that addresses that. I reached out to the actual legal department at Children's Mercy at the time, and then ran it by some of the people in ATS that also have a lawyer on hand to just review what I typed up and to make sure that it was legitimate. And that's something that then we've used actually in all the different endeavors, just slightly change it. But remember, especially if you're posting like for the sleep case conference series, sometimes there are actual video. And if you do include things like that, you need to have permission from the individuals that is then kept on file at the participating institute in that patient's chart. And that brings us right into the special legal considerations. So again, audio, video, picture file consent. Keep on file at the institution in the patient's chart. Basic science, it's copyright. Can they present their new data in a future manuscript? Or by presenting at your conference, would that count as an e-publication and potentially disqualify them from using that as a new paper elsewhere? You want to make sure that HIPAA is protected at all times. And again, rare conditions can be traceable based on location of center presenting or the type of mutation. I know that in the child network, one of the papers that had been published on surfactant protein B, it's so rare that once this was published, families actually on their Facebook site were starting to try and guess who was actually included in the paper. And that's nothing that you can completely control, but at least for a case conference series, what we do is keep everything behind that firewall. So only health professionals that have passwords to the ATS site can pull that up and watch that content.
Hey, Jane, have you found with the copyright for, I haven't thought about this before, for a case conference on the web, like you're discussing, and then you're talking about someone wanting to maybe publish that as a case series or case report, and that being seen as previously published on the web? Is that what you're?
So we have not had issues with any of the case series or case reports. Where we actually have had some issue is with the bench scientists who are presenting some of their new research and presented it at one of the kind of ATS meetings, which then was archived. And one of the journals felt that that was something where it was no longer new research, it had already been published. So they did not accept it in their actual peer-reviewed journal. Luckily for that individual, they went to another journal who had no problem. That was the first time we had ever come across that. So especially if it's the bench science side of things, it can get tricky. So you need to be very careful. And that just happened to us in the last year. We were all kind of taken by surprise. We've never had any issues with publishing like a case review.
Thanks. Yeah, that is interesting. I wonder with more virtual and recording, if that's going to become a newer issue.
I'm watching, and we have every 6 months a web directors meeting where we all get together and talk about some of these things, and the editors of the ATS journals are there as well. And this has been coming up more and more frequently. So I think we are going to start hearing more about what could then be considered an e-publication versus just an archived medical educational, discussion.
Thanks.
So finally, what about, journal club and town halls? How are they different than a case conference series? And what do you need to think about when you're setting these up? So again, does anyone have any thoughts about how this might be a little different than a case conference series?
We have a quiet group in the chat today.
Which is fine. Hopefully they are just paying attention and listening and getting important, tips. Well, first off, the journal clubs and the town halls are less frequent. We're talking maybe for a year. So if they're less frequent, people can't count on them consistently as medical educational content that they're just going to automatically know is happening and to jump on. So you have to have some kind of flyer generation or advertisement. You also want to make sure that you're using a platform that when they sign up for it, will automatically generate a link that is sent out to them. So definitely this is where GoToMeeting and Zoom does a much better job than Webex. So I actually prefer those two platforms when we're setting up any type of town hall or journal club for ATS. Because it's really easy when you have a known set group of people to keep a listserv and then through Webex just send it out to the email list that you've created. It's much harder if you don't have a consistent group of people that is going to join in. It's going to be a different group each time. And that's why you need to make sure that, number one, you advertise. Number two, in that advertisement, you have a link where you can then collect all of the people that want to be a part of it and then blast out that link about a week before. And that would be the distribution strategy that you need to think about. You also need to recruit the panelists and the authors. So it's pretty easy when you have a known case conference series that's been going on forever. You have the center directors who are like, okay, each year, this month we're presenting, so the fellows need to be aware. So it's not hard to get people to do that type of case conference series. When it's less frequent, you actually have to go out as the moderator and start recruiting people. So you need to recruit your panelists or the authors of the paper. And usually I start 2 to 3 months ahead of time because it's hard coordinating everyone's schedules. For the moderators, you really need at least 2. You need one person to do the introduction and then kind of be the time police and make sure that people are moving through the journal club or town hall in a reasonable manner. And you also want to have an individual that's watching the chat feature for questions. You want to create session timeline and assign topics. Like we're going to have a COVID-19 vaccine hesitancy town hall in about 3 weeks. And I recruited for 3 different discussion topics in ID group that's going to talk about the vaccine, the true risks, and what we've been seeing. We also have a group of providers that are in high-risk clinics and what they've been seeing with their population. And we then have some psychologists who are experts in social media, its impact on the medical field, and some of the actual myths that have been going around and ways to try and combat that. Because of that, I've told everyone, hey guys, you get 15 minutes. Give like 10 slides. I have, the moderator who's going to do the introduction, be watching that time flow, making sure we're transitioning appropriately. And then we have discussion at the end and a moderator that's going to pull up the chat questions and read them for the group to then discuss.
So Jane, there's a question from Tony Tartici on whether people listen more live or watch it later.
So what I have found is that live, at least for our town halls, the most people we had on, which was right when the COVID-19 started, was about 1,000. And then we had only about 300 or 400 hits afterwards. That's shifted over time as people have gotten busier. And we actually have about 200 people on per town hall, but our actual views have gone up to about 800. So I think the interest is there. And if people can't be there live, they will go back if you archive it quickly, like within a day or 2, watch it at that point. So that has kind of changed over time. And the town hall strategy is something that is new for ATS. We started it last year, but it seems to be working. But again, as more of us go back to work and we can't be there as easily for the actual live session, we've had a lot more people start to watch it afterwards. We're trying to come up with a strategy where they could ask questions that maybe for up to a week will then get funneled to the panelists to respond to.
That's pretty cool. Thanks.
And then also arrange a practice session a few days beforehand to do audio video checks for as many of your panelists as you can, because we find a lot of issues and we're able to address them. And then I make sure everyone's on at least 30 minutes before. So if they couldn't do the practice session, we're at least able to try and help them and get them up and running. Because a lot of people are like, oh, the town halls run so smoothly. And I want to be like, oh, you have no idea. The practice session was a hot mess. And so was 30 minutes before, but we're able to pull it all together. So when it's actually time to start, we're fine. But give yourself that extra time. It's not just going to magically run smoothly. It never does.
We have another question from Mohammed. Is there a cap or specific number limit for audience through visual platforms?
There actually is. And that's where knowing your platform is important. So when we were first using the Webex platform, it has about 700 before it starts to glitch. Some of the other platforms, if you don't allow people to share their video, you actually can go higher than that number. So that's when, as the moderator, you're actually setting up your meeting. You can control some of those features. If you have both audio and video on for all participants, my rule of thumb is if you think you're going to have over 500, you're probably going to run into some problems. You might want to consider another strategy, which usually is let everyone have potential audio, but cut the video off to the panelists and moderators only.
That's helpful. Tony has another question. How much time do you spend editing after it's completed before you post?
That is a wonderful question. And it kind of depends on how smoothly it's gone. So sometimes it might be a minute or two and I just have to convert because everything went, perfectly well. And since I'm the moderator, I actually saw it. So I was like, oh, this is great. Other times there have been some debates over gray zone management, which probably is not what you want posted. So that editing can take up to like 4 or 5 hours.
Ouch.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's why setting the ground rules up front and keeping those ground rules so people understand helps with the editing process after the fact. And luckily, most people have been very, very supportive of the Fellows in the Case Conference series. There's only been 1 or 2 instances where I've had to talk to someone, and it's been 15 years.
That's helpful. Well, thank you, Jane. This was fantastic. You are certainly an expert in this with all of your years of experience, and I think we'll be reaching out to you for advice as we move forward with some of our conferencing. So thanks for sharing your experience with us. If there's any other questions, we have a couple minutes. Otherwise, thank you again to Jane, and everyone have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, and feel free to reach out to me. I love to collaborate.
Jane, I have some questions, but I could reach out after if since it's at the end of the hour.
Sure.
But this was really great.
Awesome. I hope it's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just exhausted listening to it. So I just can't imagine how you have coordinated all this by yourself. So I was just going to ask you a couple questions about getting how to navigate the situation of getting administrative support and how the involvement with ATS works. But I can ask you maybe offline.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Hay.
Thank you. This was great.